So the key to cutting down the negative emotion tree is using the axe and eliminating blaming. The day that you begin to eliminate blaming from your life is the day that your life starts to take off. Because the day that you start to eliminate blaming and negative emotions, suddenly most of the problems, most of the things that stand between you and the happiness you desire vanish. Why am I making such an emphasis on negative emotions? Well, let me make that clear for just a second. What I found, and this is what was staggering to me because I've always been committed to realizing my potential as a human being, is that you cannot advance in life except to the degree to which you get rid of your negative emotions. You cannot make any progress. You cannot go any further than where you are right this minute except to the degree to which you leave your negative emotions behind. Now, by the way, with regard to the negative emotion that you have that's associated with another person or situation, it's difficult to accept responsibility. It's difficult to say, I am responsible initially, because you've been blaming that person for so long. So sometimes you have to say it with gritted teeth. You have to say, wait a minute, I am responsible. I am responsible. But the more you repeat this, I am responsible, I am responsible, I am responsible, it comes easier and easier. Eventually it gets to the point where as soon as you think of that person or situation, you can neutralize the thought by the law of substitution by saying, wait a minute, I am responsible. I am responsible. There's a beautiful line that you can use also in dealing with difficult people that goes back to self-esteem, and it also has to do with eliminating negative emotions, is say something like this: no matter what you say or do, I'm still a valuable and worthwhile person. Or, no matter what happens, I am still a valuable and worthwhile person. Or no matter how this situation turns out, I am still a valuable and worthwhile person. The natural course of life is this. Here's the road of life. And when we're children, we start off with no negative emotions. All negative emotions, by the way, have to be taught to a child. They have to be taught, and the child has to learn them from their parents. Have you ever seen a negative baby? There's no such thing as a negative baby. Babies just laugh and they're happy and they cry when they have needs, but babies are not negative. But as we grow up, we watch the people around us and we begin to develop our own negative emotions, which we carry in a sack on our back. As we become teenagers, this sack grows big enough to the point where we can even go to slumber parties, or we can get together with our buddies and we can talk about how terrible our childhood has been, how rotten our parents are, how rotten our siblings, teachers, and everything else are. Now, when we become adults, what is the mark of adulthood in our society? The mark of adulthood is that you have a great gunny sack full of negative emotions because you have suffered. And what happens is you spend most of your time when you're with other people letting down your guards and telling them about how much you've suffered. What you do is you use exchanges of negative emotions as the basis for your relationships. You say, look, I'll show you my negative emotions if you'll show me yours. Remember like we used to do as kids? And what you do is you get together like a couple of traders in an Arab bazaar and you display your negative emotions. You say, oh, look at this rotten childhood I had. And look at this terrible relationship. And look at how crummy my boss is and how rotten this is and so on. And you exchange them back and forth. And what happens when you talk about and think about your negative emotions? Remember the law of concentration? Whatever you dwell upon grows. Whatever you dwell upon grows and gains strength and stays alive. Negative emotions, by the way, and this is another thing that I learned in the study, is negative emotions are very fragile and ephemeral things. Is that if you don't keep them alive through constant talking, through constant cultivation, you know what happens? They die on you. Yes, you see, negative emotions just die. It's like a fire. If it falls where there's nothing, or a spark, if it falls where there's nothing to burn, it goes out. Negative emotions, unless you talk about them and keep them going, unless you dwell on them all the time, they die on you. You ever had an experience where you're really worried about something, you're really upset about something, and it's preoccupying all of your time, and then you get to work or you get home and you get so busy doing something else that for about 3 or 4 hours, you don't have time to think of anything else. About 3 or 4 hours, you stop and say, geez, I haven't worried about that for a long time. I got to get back to worrying about it because what's happening is going out. It's like a fire that's going out. So you got to get back to it. You got to think about it and talk about it and worry about it and hassle it to get it back up to the point where it's preoccupying your whole mind. How many times does that happen? Well, what the mature adult does is the mature adult leaves their negative emotions by the side of the road and gets on with the rest of their life. They get on with the rest of their life. They leave them there instead of dragging them along. They leave them like a big pile of garbage at a garbage strike. They just leave it there. And when people say, how are things going? You say, wonderful. You say, how's life? You say, terrific. You say, how's your relationships? Couldn't be better. How is your health? How are you feeling? I feel great. In other words, don't talk about negative things, because when you talk about negative things, you actually increase them and you draw more of them into your life. Look at the people that you know who have problems. You notice the people that you know have problems all the time, never seem to solve their problems, are people who talk about their problems all the time. To him that hath shall more be given, from him who hath not even that which he has shall be taken away. Now, this is another and critical point with regard to relationships. And I learned this again in my studies. It is that each of us has a certain amount of suffering that we've gone through, and people fall in love with their suffering. People love their suffering. As a matter of fact, they feel that they've paid for it, they've thought about it, they've lived with it for so long that most people are very reluctant to give up their suffering. You can't talk them out of it. You say, well, why don't you just forget it? Why don't you just put it behind you? Why don't you just get on with it? They say, well, I can't do that. Do you know how much I suffered? Do you know how much emotional investment I put into this relationship, this job, this career, and so on? I remember, I can tell you 1,000 people who have come up to me who are in bad relationships. And they say, well, I've been in this relationship or in this marriage now for several years, and I'm miserable, I'm unhappy, we don't like each other, it's going nowhere. I say, why don't you do something about it? But after all these years? And what I say to them is I say, look, the average life expectancy of the average American today is between 75 and 80 years, and it's going up. By the time we reach the end of the century, the average life expectancy will probably be 80, 85, 90 years old. You know what that means? That whatever age you are now, and you may be 20, 25, 30, 35, it doesn't really matter. You subtract that from 80, you get the number of years that you've got left to live in this current situation. You ask yourself, do you want to live in this situation for the next 30, 40, 50 years? And the answer, in all honesty, has to be no, because it's probably not going to get any better. People love their suffering. They hate to give up their suffering. So what we've devised is a very simple bit of advice. And this advice, I just recently discussed this with a consulting psychologist, and he said it's the simplest advice he's ever heard to give to people who need it. It's when somebody comes up to you and wants to talk to you about their problems. You say yes, and you be sympathetic and empathetic. It's very good to hear people and let them talk out their problems, except there are some people who do nothing but talk about their problems. Every time you see them, they talk about their problems. Very often, they talk about the same things they talked about last time. What you do is you say, yes, I hear what you say, and I'm very sympathetic. However, you're responsible for your own life. You are responsible. What are you going to do about it? You are responsible for your own life. What are you going to do about it? Now, what will happen is this, is that your good friends will say, yes, you're right, I am responsible. I have to make a change. I have to do something about it. And they'll go out and they'll do it. As a matter of fact, they'll come and they'll lay out all their problems to you. And all you say to them is this. You say, well, what do you think you should do about it? Now, your good friends can use that conversational time to get their own thoughts in line, to come up with their own conclusions and go out, and they don't need your advice. Most people don't need advice. There's an old saying that says that don't worry about the universal propensity to give advice, because the propensity to ignore it is equally universal. People don't need advice sometimes, they just need a sounding board. However, there are some people who don't have any intention of doing anything about their problems. All they want to do is they want to use their problems as an excuse to get you to talk about them. You understand that? The very common neurotic tendency in our society is to use their problems as the basis for the discussion. Here's my problems, let you and me talk about them. And the person in himself or herself has no interest in you at all. All they have an interest in is having you listen. As a matter of fact, we say this as a joke. We say that this is what these people look like. If these people look upon you as being a person, and this is your face, and this is your eyes, and these are your ears. See? And here is your eyes, preferably wide open and sympathetic. Here's your mouth, preferably shut. And here's your ears, preferably wide open. These people don't even look upon you as a person. They don't care about your problems at all. All they care about is you sitting there listening and nodding sympathetically and giving them advice which they have no intention whatever of following. When you run into people like this, it's a very simple way to test the friendship. Just start talking about yourself. Say, well, you know, I'm really glad you brought your problems to me because I've got some problems of my own, and I'd like to discuss my life with you. You will find these people will run for the door. They'll watch their watch. They've got an appointment. They'll take off so fast you can't imagine. All right, now one final point, and this is critical. It's absolutely critical to the whole subject. It's the wrap-up point, if you like. It's this, is that when we start talking about giving up negative emotions, almost everybody says, yes, I agree. What you say is true. It makes sense to me, Brian, and I am going to give up my negative emotions. I am going to accept responsibility. I am going to take charge of my life, and I'm not going to blame anybody else anymore, except for one. Everybody has one that they're not going to part with. Everybody has that favorite negative emotion that they've been paying for and holding on to for years. Now let me tell you why it's so important that you give it up. Here's a car. Imagine it's a beautiful Mercedes automobile. Brand new from the factory. Absolutely spitting 560 SEL, $55,000, beautiful vehicle. Tested in every aspect. Absolutely perfect. It's given to you without a flaw. Except for one. This is the front of the automobile, and there's one small problem, is that for some mechanical reason, this brake is locked on. Now you get into this beautiful Mercedes, just as you are, beautiful mind, beautiful body, beautiful potential, incredible capability. You get into this beautiful Mercedes and you start it up, and you step on the gas. And what happens? Well, if the front brake is locked on, what will happen to the car? No matter how hard you step on the gas, what will happen to the car? What will happen is that the car will spin. It'll go around in circles. It'll spin and it will go around in circles until you stop stepping on the gas and you give up. As long as that front brake is locked on, you can't go anywhere. What I found with this is that the existence of just one negative emotion that you will not let go of for whatever reason, and the reason is always an ego reason, the reason it always has to do with your own ego, will cause you to stay in the same place and spin your wheels and go in circles for the rest of your life. That you all know people who are talented, who have opportunities, good educations, and so on and so forth, and their life just goes around in circles. They just seem to be spinning. They've got everything going for them, and they just continually have problems. Why is it? Almost invariably, and this is what all psychoanalysis does, all psychotherapy, is they've got one negative emotion locked on, and the negative emotion they have locked on is blame. There is somebody that they are still blaming for something. There's somebody that they are not going to let off the hook because that son of a gun did something to them. You know what I'm talking about? You know what I'm talking about, because we're all in the same boat. We're all human beings. The reason this makes sense to you and I is because we do have a tendency to fall in love with our suffering. We do have a tendency to gunny sack and to think that part of our humanity is all these negative emotions. We do have a tendency to see that other people are responsible. Other people have hurt us. They did cost us money. They did hurt us in a relationship. But the key to peak performance, the key to happiness, the key to success is to use the law of substitution and knock those negative emotions out of the box. By the very first time you think of anything that causes you any stress, you say, I am responsible. Wait a minute, I am responsible. I am responsible. I am responsible. I like myself and I am responsible. I like myself and I am responsible. And nothing outside of me is going to disrupt my peace of mind. I am in charge of my emotional life. I am responsible. You are responsible.
Session 7, Releasing Your Brakes.
When I began studying negative emotions many years ago, the most critical point I discovered was that you cannot make any progress toward health, happiness, love, and fulfillment of your potential as long as you insist on keeping your negative emotions intact. Now, the only good thing about negative emotions, if there is any good thing at all, is that negative emotions are not permanent. Even according to Sigmund Freud, there is no permanent place for negative emotions in the subconscious. In other words, they are unwanted visitors. They are negative habits or negative response patterns that can be eliminated. And the starting point of eliminating them is understanding where they came from. Understanding what were the causative factors going back to early childhood that have triggered the development of negative emotions and have given us as adults a propensity to be negative in one way or another. That takes us to early childhood conditioning. Remember we said before that the starting point of inhibitive and compulsive negative habit patterns was destructive criticism. Destructive criticism is the great destroyer. Destructive criticism destroys people on the inside and leaves them walking around on the outside. More personalities have been undermined and destroyed. More self-esteem has been cast aside as a result of destructive criticism than anything else that we can possibly imagine. So destructive criticism is the great killer. Now, why is it so bad? Well, we know that children as infants children as they're growing up have a tremendous need for love and approval from their parents. In fact, many psychiatrists and psychologists have said that the number one reason for mental illness in adulthood is withdrawal of love, or love withheld. We know that any prestigious person, any person who is important to a child, has an inordinate impact on that child, and that children up to the age of 6 years have very little ability to discriminate between valid and invalid criticism. What this means is that anything that a parent or an older sibling or an older relative, anything that a prestigious person or important person says to a child is accepted as true, is accepted as a valid representation of reality. If a mother says you're a bad boy, if daddy says you're lazy, if someone says that you're not dependable, if someone says you're stupid or you're clumsy or you're ugly, the child has no capacity whatever to discriminate between valid and invalid. The child accepts that as a true representation of reality. It bypasses the conscious mind, goes straight into the subconscious, and is stored. Many of us as adults are still living on the basis of negative information that was programmed into us when we were children. And then as adults, what do we say? We say, well, that's just the way I am. Or I've always been that way. Or some people would say, well, it runs in the family. Your father was like that, children are like that. Or your mother was like that, and so on. But where did it come from? None of these things run in the family. For instance, when I was growing up, my parents had gone through the Depression. And the Depression had made an inordinate impact on them. So whenever we talked about buying anything, all the time I was growing up, my parents would become very, very tense, and they'd say, we can't afford it. We can't afford it. We can't afford it. We can't afford it. They had this lack mentality, this we can't afford it mentality all their lives. And I grew up, so even though I've never experienced the Depression, and you've never experienced the Depression in most cases, 10, 20, 30, 40 years later, we're still saying, I can't afford it. I can't afford it. I can't afford it. We're still going on the basis of those critical remarks, those emotionalized remarks that our parents said. Maybe your parents said, as my father told me over and over again, you never finish anything you start. You never finish anything you start. You never finish anything you start. Or you're lazy. You never finish anything you start. You know, when I was an adult, I had a terrible time finishing things that I started. As I would get close to the end of a task, I would actually begin to seize up and look for every single excuse to procrastinate and delay. Now, the second factor that predisposes us to negative emotions is lack of love. We know that children's personalities develop to the degree to which they receive a high quality and a high quantity of love from their parents. There's a one-to-one relationship between the amount of love, the quality and quantity of love, and healthy personality. That love withdrawn or deprivation of love is the key cause of unhappiness, negativity, and mental illness in adulthood. Now, in order for a child to feel truly loved, the child must have high self-concept parents, and most of us, unfortunately, had parents that were the victims of their parents and the victims of their parents. What one of the writers says, everybody is a victim of a victim. We are all victims of victims. In other words, parents meant to raise us the best way they could, but they were victims of victims themselves. Now, in order for a child to feel fully loved, 3 conditions have to exist. Number 1 condition is that parents must love themselves. Parents must love themselves. Remember, you can never give any more love to others than you have for yourself. If you don't love yourself, you can't love your children. If you have a little bit of love for yourself, you have to spread it over your children. If you have a little bit of love for yourself and that's all taken up by your husband or your wife, and sometimes even though you want to love your children, you don't have the love. Even if your parents wanted to love you, in many cases they didn't have the love to give. Why? It's because they never got it when they were growing up. The second requirement is that parents must love each other. In order for a child to grow up feeling self-confident, to grow up feeling loved, to grow up feeling safe and secure, he or she must grow up in an environment where the parents love each other. There is nothing that is more frightening to a child than to grow up in a household where the parents are fighting with each other, where the parents don't love each other, where there's difficulty, because the child always has a tendency, first of all, to be a victim, in that the child is shouted at and screamed at, and the child believes that the reason my mommy and daddy are fighting is it's my fault. Now, interesting research, since there are so many single-parent families today, interesting research shows that when one of the parents leaves as a result of a separation or a divorce, the remaining child or children are invariably convinced that the reason the other parent left was because of something they did. And it's critical if a marriage or a relationship is going to end and one is going to leave, that the remaining parent tell the children over and over again that the reason the relationship didn't work out has nothing to do with you. It has only to do with me and daddy or me and mommy. It has nothing to do with the child. The child needs to hear it many, many times before the child feels confident and secure. And of course, it's always better that a child be raised in a home with one parent that loves them rather than two parents that don't love each other. Now, the third condition that must be fulfilled if lack of love is not to exist is that parents must love the child. Parents must love the child. Well, this seems pretty obvious. I mean, it's pretty logical. The fact of the matter is, though, and this is the hardest thing for you or I as adults even to think about, but it is possible that our parents didn't love us. Not that they didn't intend to. I mean, they meant to love us, and they wanted to love us, and they had us intending to love us, and so on, but simply because they had conflicts with each other, and they had unresolved problems with their parents, and they had the war and the depression, and they had their careers, and they had other responsibilities, they just never got around to it. See, that was the difficulty. They meant to, but they never got around to it. The only way that you can really love a child is by spending a high quantity and high quality of time with the child. High quantity, high quality with the child. 10 minutes a day doesn't do it. Children consider themselves valuable to the degree to which the most important people in their lives spend time with them. If the most important people in their lives, their parents, only spend a little time with them, the children conclude that the reason for that is because they are defective. There is something essentially wrong with them, and that's why their parents don't spend time with them. The children don't think rationally, they think purely emotionally. They only think if the parent is here, he loves me or she loves me. If the parent doesn't spend time with me, he or she doesn't love me. So if any one of those three conditions or more existed when you were growing up, the parents didn't love themselves, the parents didn't love each other, or maybe the parents didn't love you because they never got around to it, although they meant to, then you will have grown up in conjunction with destructive criticism with what is called guilt. Now, what is guilt? Well, guilt is a feeling of not being worth very much. Where do we get this feeling? Well, when we're continually criticized by the important people in our lives, and simultaneously we are not given the amount of love that we need, we feel that we're not worth very much. We feel that we are worth less. And a feeling of guilt leads to a feeling of worthlessness. Worthlessness. And guilt, the feeling of worthlessness, is the underlying fundamental problem of the 20th century. It is the main source of mental illness. It is the main source of problems in relationships. It's the main source of psychosomatic illness. It is the main source of most of the problems that beset our society, is this deep down feeling of guilt and worthlessness, which is expressed or unexpressed in the thought or the attitude, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. You know, we talked about self-esteem and how important it was. Self-esteem means I like myself. I like myself. I like myself. I like myself. People who've been raised with destructive criticism and lack of life not only don't like themselves, they don't feel that they're good enough for anybody or anything, and in many cases, they are plagued by self-hatred. They hate themselves. Self-hatred or self-condemnation. And you'll see this will come out in their conversation, and it will come out in their relationships with other people. People who hate themselves, even though they want to have good relationships with other people, are simply not capable of it. People who don't feel that they're good enough for anything will always bring it to the surface. That will always be a problem. Now, what is the main reasons for guilt? Actually, where does guilt come from? Guilt comes from three negative sources. Negative parents, negative influences, or negative religion. One of the three. Any one of the three uses guilt, and guilt is used or practiced, especially by parents and by some religious denominations, for two reasons. One is punishment. Guilt is used to punish us. When we're growing up, it's the easiest way to punish a person is to make them feel bad. So our parents make us feel bad by physically punishing us or by verbally abusing us. And punishment is a very good way to gain conformance. Punishment is a very good way to get people to do what you want. The second reason why guilt is used when it's consciously practiced, and some organizations practice it consciously, is for control. Emotional control especially, because if you can emotionally control a person with guilt, you can manipulate their behavior. And there are many organizations that use guilt as a tool of control and manipulation. If you can control people strongly enough, especially emotionally, you can get their money, you can get their time, you can get their commitment, you can demand their resources, and so on. And many organizations use punishment, use guilt as a tool for doing it. Many of the charities that advertise on television, especially charities for very needy causes involving children or disabled people, use the feeling of guilt. You're doing so well, you should feel guilty for these people who are suffering. Therefore, send us the money, and that will take care of your guilt for a little while until we get you on our mailing list, and so on. So guilt is a standard. Why is it that guilt is so commonly used? Well, first of all, because almost all of us have it to a greater or lesser degree. And number two, it's easy. Guilt is the easiest. Why do our parents use guilt on us? Why do our mothers use guilt on us? Because a mother can control us with guilt across a crowded room. She can control us over 1,000 miles of telephone line. And parents can use guilt on their children because their parents use guilt on them, when their parents use guilt on them, because it's the easiest. There's no physical effort. You can do it with a look, a glance, and a word. And people always do the easiest thing, as you know. So be alert to it. Now, if you've been brought up in an environment where you've been made to feel guilty, and almost all of us have, you must understand that guilt is like a cesspool of negative emotional bacteria that sits at the core or the root of your psyche or your subconscious, and it springs forth all other negative emotions: anger, hatred, envy, resentment, frustration, and doubt and fear, and so on and so forth. It controls, it creates them all. And a way to really, really get rid of that core is to excise it and cut it out completely. So that's what we're going to do in the rest of this session. First of all, how can you tell if you have been brought up with feelings of guilt? All right, we'll call this the adult manifestations of guilt. Adult manifestations of guilt. You can tell, and you can just test yourself, how many of these do you have? Number one, adult manifestation of guilt, is you have feelings of inferiority. Feelings of inferiority, feelings of inadequacy, and feelings of undeservingness. In other words, you don't feel that you deserve good things to happen to you. If a person has been brought up with destructive criticism, made to feel guilty, then when they do succeed, even with tremendous effort later on in life, they have a terrible tendency to feel that they don't deserve it. This is called, by the way, fear of success. Fear of success is just another way of saying that a person who has been conditioned to believe themselves to be unworthy or not good enough feels very, very uncomfortable when they experience success. They feel very, very tense and uneasy. As a matter of fact, if they feel too much tension, they'll start snorting coke, drinking too much alcohol, they'll engage in self-destructive behaviors, they'll have a tremendous, overwhelming feeling of anxiety, like somebody's going to find them out. There's a book on the bookstands that says, if I'm doing so well, how come I feel like an imposter? They have what is called the imposter syndrome. Have you ever been successful at something and people come up to you and say, boy, you did a great job at that, or that's wonderful, even if you had worked hard at it, and you felt like they were going to find you out? You felt like, they would find out that you weren't really that good, that it was just a fluke, it was just an accident. And of course, that's what people say. They say, it was just a fluke. It was just an accident. I don't know how it happened. I'll blow it next time. They do everything possible to get away from this feeling of inferiority and undeservingness. So be alert to that. Now, the second adult manifestation of guilt is destructive self-criticism. There is a line from one of the poets that says, those to whom evil is done do evil in return. Children at a very early age, sometimes at the age of 2 or 3, begin to run themselves down, tear themselves down, even to hit themselves and physically punish themselves if they're criticized enough. They're always saying the equivalent of, I'm not good enough, or I'm not very good, and they punish themselves. So destructive self-criticism is a real symptom of an underlying feeling of guilt and inadequacy. Number 3 is easily manipulated by guilt. People can pull your guilt strings. Very simple. As a matter of fact, we find that there are 2 types of people in the world. There's guilt throwers and there's guilt catchers. And these people are invariably attracted to each other. And of course, the guilt thrower is the person who identified with a parent who threw the guilt. The guilt catcher is the person who identified with a parent who caught the guilt. But the guilt throwers and the guilt catchers then get together. They balance nicely. They settle down. They raise new generations of little guilt throwers and guilt catchers. But you can tell that you're easily manipulated by guilt because you've been conditioned to be responded to. Your boss can pull your guilt string. A person on a bus can pull your guilt string. The airline flight attendant can pull your guilt string. Be very, very alert to this. The third manifestation, or the fourth manifestation of guilt, is that you use it. You use guilt and blame generously. Why? Well, it's been worked on you, you work it on them. I mean, if exchange is a fair deal. You use guilt and blame generously. It becomes the basis of your relationships with other people. Is when something goes wrong, you pin the rap on them. Something goes wrong, you blame someone. Instantly there's a problem, you look around to see who's to blame. They did an interesting experiment in Candid Camera a few years ago where they took and they put a patch of ice on a sidewalk where it shouldn't be. It wasn't that cold, but they froze the ice. And then they watched how people would react as they walked along. And they'd be walking along, and they'd hit this patch of ice in it, and they'd grab their balance, and they'd turn around. The first thing they'd do is they'd look at the person closest to them, and they'd glare at them as if they're furious. In other words, they looked at somebody to blame. Now, if there wasn't anybody within 10 or 15 feet, they would get their balance back again. They'd look around. There'd be nobody around them, and they'd kick the ground and stomp on the ground and walk away. See, our natural tendency whenever anything goes wrong is to look for someone or something to blame, especially if we've been brought up being blamed continuously. And the fifth manifestation is what is called victim language. Now, remember we talked about the law of concentration. It says whatever you dwell upon grows. It also says that if you use victim language, you keep the guilt alive. You reinforce it, you build it, you grow it, you fertilize it. Victim language is language like I can't, I can't, I can't. Whenever you say I can't, I can't, I can't, you're sending a message to the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind picks up that you are helpless, that you're not in control, that you're a victim. And so when you actually come to want to do something, the subconscious mind just feeds back your own command. It says, you can't, you can't. The second thing is you say, I have to, I have to. Again, I have no control. I'm not in charge. But here's two other expressions of victim language that you got to be careful of. And it's this one. I'll try. I'll try. Whatever it is, I'll try. What does the words I'll try mean? Well, let me tell you what they mean. They mean I'm going to fail, and I'm telling you in advance so that you can't come back on me. In other words, you say, well, I'll try to be there on time, but what you're saying is I'll probably be late, and there's no point. You can't come back on me because I said I'd try. Whenever a person says I'll try, they are excusing failure in advance. If you went to the doctor and the doctor did an examination and checked you all over and looked at you and came back and said, well, geez, you're in terrible condition. We're going to have to do triple bypass surgery and get you over to the hospital right now. I'm surprised you even made it in. And you say, well, geez, doctor, I sure hope you'll do a good job. And he says, I'll try. And he says, I'll try. He said, wait a second. Maybe I got to get a second opinion. You go to a lawyer. You're charged with something. You go to a lawyer and you present your case to the lawyer. You say, look, will you defend me? He says, I'll try. What is he saying? He's saying, look, I've looked at the case, and from what I see, there's not much hope, but I'll take it on anyway. I'll try. And they're the ones that try to get you to pay in advance, too. Another set of words that you mustn't use. By the way, with regard to I'll try, what you do is you say, I'll do it or I won't do it, not I'll try. If ever, in our business, we run a very, very active business. Whenever we call somebody up and we ask them, can we get this or that? And they say, well, I'll try to have it to you by Friday, or I'll try to get it done on time. We instantly know that they're telling us that they want off the hook, they're not going to do it. And so we never let anybody get away with I'll try. We say it has to be done or not, and we want a guarantee. And if necessary, we'll go and pick it up. But whenever they say I'll try, what they're doing is they're bluffing you off. So be alert to that. And the other words are I wish. A wish, as they say, is a desire or a goal with no energy behind it. I wish. What does I wish mean? I wish means that I would like to have something, but I know I never can. When you say, I wish I could lose weight, what does it mean? The unspoken words are, but I know I can't. Why can't you? Because of the excuses that you have and the metabolisms that you have and the problems and so on. There's always reasons because you have to go out and so on. I wish I could quit smoking. I wish I could get fit. I wish, I wish, I wish. Whenever you use the words I wish, you signal to the subconscious that this is something that you do not believe it's possible for you to achieve or acquire. The subconscious then completely discards it as a goal and gives you no energy, no motivation, no drive, no desire to accomplish it. So be very, very alert to victim language. Be alert to the expression, yes, but. Oh, I do it. Yes, but. Oh, someone says, why don't you do this? You say, yes, but. The word but, by the way, is the great eraser. When a person says, you could certainly increase your income or increase your output or be a better person or happier or lose weight or whatever else it happened to be, and you say yes, but, what you're saying is you're erasing the whole statement that has gone before it. You send a message to your subconscious that says, no possibility, make no effort, focus no energy, commit no capacity to the accomplishment of this goal. So people who've been brought up feeling guilty have 5 qualities or 5 adult manifestations. 1 is they feel inferior, they feel inadequate, they feel like they don't deserve good things to happen to them. You're very alert to that. Number 2 is they run themselves down continually. They use destructive self-criticism. Number 3 is they use guilt and blame on themselves and on others. Number 4 is they're easily manipulated by guilt. Number 5, they use victim language. So let's go and say, how do we get rid of guilt? Isn't it amazing how this board just clears? Isn't that amazing? It's absolutely vanishing. We have a sort of a magic wand that we wave when I go over and sit on that desk. All right, how do we rid ourselves of guilt? Ridding yourself of guilt. Here's the process. It's got a few really critical steps. Number 1, top of the list, eliminate destructive self-criticism. Eliminate destructive self-criticism. In other words, never say anything destructively critical about yourself. Just don't say it. Here's the basic rule. Since your subconscious accepts whatever you say as true, as being a command, what you do is you don't say anything about yourself that you do not sincerely desire to be true. Don't say, I'm fat, I'm tired. Don't say, I can't, or I have to. Don't say anything unless you want it to be true. Remember, the words that come after the word I are the words that your subconscious records as commands, except for when you say, I wish or I'll try. So eliminate destructive self-criticism. Only speak in positive terms about yourself. I like myself. I like myself. I can do it. I will do it. I choose to do it. But not I can't or so on. Number 2 is refuse to be manipulated by guilt. Refuse to be manipulated by guilt. Because every time you allow somebody to manipulate you by guilt, you know what happens? You reinforce and make stronger the effect or the influence of guilt in your life. Now, when I grew up in a family that was greatly influenced by negative religion. As a matter of fact, my mother, God bless her, had a black belt in guilt, and she did a superb job on it. And it took me years to get over it. When I got married to Barbara, she'd also come from the same sort of family. So we have to come back, and we have a beautiful response. Whenever the other of us falls back into old patterns, we say, you're not trying to make me feel guilty, are you? You're not trying to make me feel guilty, are you? That's a beautiful way to do it. Just say, you're not trying to make me feel guilty, are you? And refuse to let people manipulate you using guilt. Number 3 is refuse to use guilt and blame. And announce that you're not going to use it. Refuse to use it on other people. And let your children and let your spouse say the same thing. You're not trying to make me feel guilty, are you? And just keep repeating it over and over again. And say, well, and sometimes they say, yes, I am. You say, well, it's not going to work. It's not going to work anymore. You see, guilt only works as long as you don't know that it's being used on you. Number 4 is what we call the law of forgiveness. This is the most important of all. It's really the core, it's the guts of this whole session. The law of forgiveness simply says that you are mentally healthy to the degree to which you can freely forgive and forget grievances against you. That your ability to forgive others is the key determinant of your happiness and success in life. Your ability to forgive others is the key way to eliminate guilt. Your willingness to forgive others and to let go past grievances is the single most important determinant of whether or not you are a fully integrated, fully functioning adult human being. Because the tendency to blame and to hold grudges is a childlike, pathological tendency that is possessed by all people who are mentally ill. The ability to let go of grudges, to forgive freely, is the mark of the truly enlightened human being. Now, you accept that as true. There's 4 people that you have to forgive. Number 1 is forgive your parents. Forgive your parents for everything that they've ever done that hurt you. Most of our research shows that almost all of our adult problems trace back to being unwilling or unable to forgive our parents something that they did that hurt us. Forgive them 100%. Write to them, telephone them, tell them, or at the very least, forgive them in your heart, but forgive your parents. Number 2 is forgive others. Forgive everyone else. Forgive everyone who has ever hurt you in any way for anything. Just let it go. Now, some people say, well, I can't forgive that person because what a terrible thing they did to me. Remember this, that forgiveness is perfectly selfish. Forgiveness has nothing whatever to do with the other person. It has only to do with your peace of mind and with your assuring your own mental integrity. Number 3, forgive yourself. Forgive yourself for every wicked, senseless, brainless, foolish, stupid thing you ever did. Because every single person has done wicked, senseless, brainless, foolish, ridiculous things. But forgive yourself 100%. And finally, the last part of this is if you have done something to hurt someone else, go and apologize. It's amazing how many lives are ruined year after year by people who do not have the intestinal fortitude, the guts, the courage to go and say, I'm sorry. One of the most important things in life is to develop character. We develop character to the degree to which we do things which are hard for us, the degree to which we do things which we know are right, even though they're difficult, and especially when they're difficult emotionally. And the key to getting rid of guilt, the key to being a totally, fully functioning person is to forgive others. Forgive people that you've been in relationships with. Forgive previous employers. Forgive friends who've hurt you. Forgive investments that went wrong. Forgive bosses that fired you. Forgive your parents. Forgive everybody. Develop an attitude toward life that you refuse to hold a grudge against anybody. Just repeat over and over again, I forgive him or her for everything. I forgive him or her for everything. I forgive them for everything. And let it go. The key to freeing yourself from negative emotions is to absolutely refuse to carry any negativity forward. Remember, it's a perfectly selfish act. You can be as selfish as you want. The act of forgiveness frees you and liberates the other person and guarantees that you will move rapidly toward the fulfillment of your potential.
Session 8, The Worry Buster.
One of the great aims of life is to achieve your own peace of mind. And the reason why so few people have peace of mind is because they don't set it as an important enough goal. And if they do, they don't take the time to understand what stands between them and peace of mind. Now, we talked earlier about one of the major obstacles or major pairs of obstacles are negative habit patterns, the fear of failure, the fear of rejection. Those rob us of an enormous amount of peace of mind. We also talked about feelings of guilt, feelings of inadequacy, feelings of worthlessness, feelings of undeservingness, and so on. They also rob us of peace of mind. And I want to talk in this session about the last, if you like, key to this discussion on negative emotions, what we call negative imagination. Now, the word negative imagination comes from an extensive body of literature that was written at the beginning of the century, but they found that negative imagination is something that we create in ourselves that causes us an enormous amount of stress and distress, if you like. Negative imagination creates fear. And one of the best definitions of fear that I've seen lately is what is called fantasized experiences appearing real. Fantasized experiences appearing real. In other words, these are experiences which we create in our minds and our imaginations, and we dwell upon them, and the more we dwell upon them, the more real they become to us. It's like I have 3 little children, and if I let them watch a scary movie, even if they insist upon it, they begin to feel that there are scary creatures under their beds and in their cupboards and so on. Is the fantasized experiences become real. And at one time, with little Michael, we couldn't get him to sleep in his bedroom at all because he was convinced that there were monsters in there. What do we call negative imagination? Well, another word for it is worry. Worry is a sustained form of fear caused by indecision. Worry is a sustained form of fear caused by indecision. Now, what does that mean? It means that when we make decisions, we do away with worry. A study was done some years ago where many thousands of people were surveyed and asked, what were they worrying about at the current time? And they accumulated it all up, and they found this is what people worry about. 40% of the worries that people had were things that never happened. When they went back later, they found that the things they were worried about would never happen. They were going to be late, or they'd lose a job, or they wouldn't work out on a date or a relationship. The figure, 30%, were things that were in the past, that had already happened and nothing could be done about. There were 12% of worries were worries about health. In most cases, needless worries. The thought that they had a pain or an illness or an ailment or something else that didn't turn out to be true. 10% of the things people worried about were petty worries. They were worried about whether or not they had enough change in the parking meter, whether or not someone would phone them. Really irrelevant worries. Only 8% of the worries were about anything substantial at all, and of those 8%, half, or 4%, were totally outside the control of the person. They were worried about whether Red China would invade northern Vietnam and things like that. I think things that the person had nothing to do about anyway. So basically, the research shows that as much as 96% of everything that we worry about or more is irrelevant. It never happens. It's not worth worrying about at all. But where does worry come from? Well, worry comes from a worry mentality. As a matter of fact, if you were brought up in a family where your mother or father was a worrier, they worried all the time, then you're probably a worrier too. It's a conditioned response. You saw them worrying, you want to be like your mommy and daddy because they're the most important people in your world, so you worry too. And I've seen little kids 4 and 5 years old that are really good, accomplished worriers, and they and their parents will sit together and worry, even though there's nothing involved. But it's fantasized experiences appearing real. Our job is to eliminate worry, and I'd like to give you 2 or 3 simple ideas that you can use. Number 1, which is one of the most popular of all, is just simply this. It's live one day at a time. Live one day at a time. Just don't worry about what might happen tomorrow. Don't worry about what may happen a year from now or 6 months from now. Just do the very best you can right now. There's a beautiful line from Teddy Roosevelt. He said something to the effect that do what you can where you are with what you have, and don't worry about the rest. Do what you can where you are with what you have, and don't worry about the rest. Live one day at a time. Just worry about getting through today and taking care of today. And as the Bible says, let the morrow take care of itself. Sufficient unto the day are the cares thereof. Number 2 key to dealing with worry, and I have an enormous number of challenges that I face in my business life, is get the facts. This is so important. Get the facts. Not the apparent facts, not the quick facts, not the facts that seem obvious, but get the real facts. Take the time to look into a situation and find out what the real truth of the matter is. I have found that most worry situations evaporate if you get enough facts. You hear that somebody has done something or not done something. You hear about a change in your business or your personal life or change in one of your relationships. Find out. Call the person. Find from the right information source the answer, and you'll often find that the facts eliminate the worry. Most people who worry are people who would much rather worry than take the time to ask and find out what exactly is going on. Ask people, do your research, do your reading, do your homework, get the facts. One of the most important requirements, by the way, for your success in business or any other thing, any other field of endeavor, is to get the facts that you need so that your answers are accurate and up to date. Now, the third method is what I call the worry buster. The worry buster is a word or an expression that came from one of our graduates. He said this expression literally saved his business and saved his mental health. It's one of the simplest of all techniques, and it is just dynamite. It consists of 4 steps. All right, step number 1 is when you have something on your mind, define it clearly in writing. Define it clearly in writing. Sit down, take the time to write it out and say, what exactly is it that I'm worried about? And sit down and write it out. I am worried about this, and describe the situation exactly the way you see it. In medicine, they say that accurate diagnosis is 50% of the cure. Accurate diagnosis, defining it clearly in writing, is 50% of the cure. Now, an important point here is sometimes when you have what seems to be an overwhelming problem, you have more than one problem. You have what is called a cluster situation, where you have 2 or 3 or 4 problems all together. If you define it clearly in writing, sometimes you can write it out, 1, 2, 3, 4, that there are several little problems that are all together that are worrying you. And sometimes if you eliminate one of those difficulties, the rest of them evaporate. Sometimes one problem in a cluster of problems is the key and all the others become irrelevant. So be alert to that, but define it clearly in writing. Number 2 is once you define it clearly, this is the key. Determine the worst possible outcome. Determine the worst possible outcome. In other words, ask yourself, what is the worst possible thing that could happen as a result of this situation? Left to itself, if the worst happened, what would it be? Determine the worst possible outcome. Now, an interesting thing happens here. We find that in worry, we are not worried or stressed by the event. An event does not trouble us. What troubles us is anticipation of an event and the resistance that we put up psychologically, wishing, hoping, praying that it doesn't take place. If psychologically we determine the worst possible outcome in writing, and you say the worst possible thing that can happen is this, and we make it concrete and we put it down on paper, you will find a remarkable thing. Your worries disappear. They just seem to evaporate as soon as we define the worst possible outcome. The stress comes from not wanting to face what it could be. We talk about this later, but it's the psychological phenomenon of denial. We deny, we don't want to put off. For instance, you have an investment, and the investment is getting worse and worse. So you have to say to yourself, what's the worst thing that can happen with this investment? And the worst thing is that you lose it all. Once you say, I lose it all, suddenly you're not so worried about it anymore because, it just may happen. The third step, or let me go back a second, with regard to a relationship. Sometimes we're in a relationship that's very unhappy, and we say, well, what's the worst thing that can happen here? The worst thing that can happen here is that you lose the relationship. The relationship disappears. Then you have to ask yourself, will that kill me? Will the loss of the investment kill me? Will the loss of the job kill me? Will the loss of the relationship kill me? And the answer, of course, is no. You will recover from the loss of almost anything. So number 3, by the way, there are many people who get and have the signs of cancer, but they won't go to a doctor because they don't want to know. The stress of not knowing actually exacerbates the course of the disease, and finally, when they do have to go to a doctor, it's gone so far the doctor can't save them. But the stress of not facing the possibility keeps them away from a doctor long past the point where a doctor could help them. Number 3 is resolve to accept the worst should it occur. Resolve to accept the worst should it occur. This is not passive, and this is not fatalistic. Just say, if nothing could be done, and this were to happen, I will accept it. I have a saying which I use that is, what cannot be cured must be endured. What cannot be cured must be endured. So you say, well, all right, if this happens, I'll accept it, and I'll learn to live with it. I'm not going to let it break me. I'm not going to let it kill me. And then number 4 is begin immediately to improve upon the worst. Begin immediately to improve upon the worst. What does that mean? It means you've now accepted that it might happen, and you've now decided that you will live with it should it occur, and now you do everything you possibly can to work back and make sure that the worst doesn't occur. In business, by the way, this is called the minimax regret analysis. It's minimizing the maximum regret. In other words, it's saying, what is the worst thing that can happen and how can I minimize that maximum regret? This minimax technique is a tremendous technique because it clears your mind considerably. And one of the best ways to use it is this. Really neat method. Take a piece of paper, draw a line down the center and a line across the top, and then work down the page. And right on this side, write WPO. Right on this page, your definition. In other words, this is a clear definition of what's bothering you. On the top of this page, you write WPO. Worst possible outcome. And then you write 1, and you say, I'm worried about this. And you write it out clearly. And then you write 1, you say the worst possible outcome is this. 2, I'm worried about this. 2, worst possible outcome is this. And so on. You'll find that every single time you do this, the problem just evaporates. And most, not all of course, but most of the stress or strain disappears. Your mind goes clear, and with a clear mind, you can then deal with it effectively. Now, the final point with regard to this whole idea of worry and negative imagination is, what is the antidote? What is the antidote to worry? What do you think it is? Well, it's simply this. It is purposeful action. The only real antidote to worry is purposeful action. Everything that gets you to the point where you can take purposeful action, where you can move, and as Shakespeare says, take arms against the sea of troubles, and by so doing end them, anything that gets you to the point where you can take purposeful action will eliminate the worry. Why? Because of what we call the law of substitution. You cannot be working on a problem or a situation and thinking and acting purposefully to resolve it and still worry about it simultaneously. Worry almost always comes when you have too much time on your hands. Worry is a form of negative goal setting. Remember we talked about the law of concentration? It says whatever you dwell upon grows. Well, whenever you have a worry situation, what do you find yourself doing? What you find yourself doing is thinking about, talking about, dwelling upon, vividly imagining exactly what you don't want. By the law of expectations, is whatever you expect will come into your life. That which I greatly feared has come upon me, is what it says in the book of Job. Or the law of attraction says you will attract into your life the people and circumstances in harmony with your dominant thoughts. The reason why we're taking a whole module to talk about worry is this, is that there are some people who don't worry about anything. This method, by the way, of determining the worst possible outcome, the worry buster, is also a tremendous method for decision making. When you go into any situation where you have to make a decision one way or another, the first question you should sit and ask, once you've analyzed it, is what's the worst thing that can happen? I remember the great J. Paul Getty, who at one time was one of the richest men in the world, said that this method of determining the worst possible downside was used by him as a decision-making method into every business deal he went to. What he would do is he would say, no, what's the worst thing that can happen? And then he would make sure that the worst didn't happen. So make the decision right now that you're going to eliminate worry, fantasized experiences appearing real, that you're going to accept the worst possible outcome should it occur, and now get busy, do everything humanly possible to take constructive action to eliminate the worry situation and do away with it. That's the key to eliminating the final of the worst of our negative emotions.
This is the end of side 2. Please fast forward the tape to the end to cue up side 1 for your next listening.
Brian Tracy presenta el programa Fénix. La psicología del logro.
Session 9. Programming Your Mind for Success.
Everything you are or ever will be is a result of what is going on inside your mind. This is the most awesome concept that I've ever discovered, that anybody has ever discovered, that you can dramatically change the outer realities of your life by changing your inner attitudes of mind, as William James said. We talked earlier about the various laws, the law of belief, that your beliefs do become your realities, that you actually see the world in terms of what you believe to be true about it. Beliefs create the actual fact. As a man thinketh in his heart, or as a woman thinketh in her heart, so are they. We also know that law of correspondence says that your outer world will always correspond with your inner world. That means that there is something in your inner world that corresponds to everything in your outer world. The great Emmett Fox said this when he talked about the mental equivalent. He said that everything in your outer life has a mental equivalent in your inner life. Anything that you want to see different in your outer life, you must first provide the mental equivalent internally. And the law of attraction says that anything that you keep holding your mind on a continuing basis, you draw to you. That your dominant thought set up a force field of energy that draws into your life the people and circumstances that you need. I mention that because of this. Many people say, well, how will I get a better job or a better relationship? How will I find the information I need or get the education and so on? You don't have to worry about it. All you have to do is get it crystal clear in your mind, and you trigger into and get into the flow of these universal mental laws, and everything that you need will be brought to you exactly as you need it, exactly when you need it, and exactly in the form that you need it. And we're going to talk in this session, we talked about self-concept before. We said that your self-concept is that bundle of beliefs inside that determines everything that happens to you. Your self-concept is the sum total result of every single piece of information that you've ever taken in about yourself or your world, accepted as true. It becomes part of your self-concept, and your self-concept is the corresponding inner mechanism that determines what happens to you. What does this mean? It means that all change begins with a change in the self-concept. All change begins by you taking in new information that changes your beliefs. Now, beliefs are the hardest of all things to change because we defend them so vigorously. We have to be willing to give up some of our self-limiting beliefs. We have to be willing to look at our beliefs honestly. Remember, we talked about self-knowledge. You have to be willing to look at our beliefs honestly and say, do these beliefs serve me? Is this what I want to be? Is this what I want to do? Is this the best that I can have? And you begin to question your beliefs and change your self-concept by taking in new information that develops a new self-concept. And that brings us to a concept called the psychology of becoming. The psychology of becoming says that each one of us is in a continuous state of growth and change, that your self-concepts and your beliefs are changing all the time. For instance, when you were a child, you believed one set of things about the adult world. When you were a teenager, another. When you were in your early 20s, you believed another. And as we grow and evolve, we change our beliefs and our self-concept. We change our self-image. We change the way we see the world. So we're in this process of becoming all the time. It's going on. It's almost like this. It's like a tumbleweed, is that you are evolving and changing and growing all the time, but always in the direction of your dominant goal. Always in the direction of what you are thinking about the most intensely at the time. For instance, an alcoholic or a drug addict is also evolving and changing in the direction of his or her dominant goal, because that's what they think about all the time. And if you want to evolve and grow rapidly, you have to make those goals clear, you have to make them sharp, you have to make them intense, and you have to dwell on them all the time. Sometimes you see people who are very successful at an early age, but you'll find that those people had an obsession, a total preoccupation with a particular area or field for a long time, whereas other people who may be much older have never had an intense feeling or have never dwelled on anything they want to accomplish. Now, there's two obstacles to this psychology of becoming. Number one is called homeostasis. Now, homeostasis is the desire for consistency. It is a natural desire within the human mind to stay constant with what has happened in the past. If you like, we like to maintain the status quo. These are the people who say that's the way we've always done it, this is the way we do it around here, etc., etc. You must watch out for homeostasis, because what it does is it causes your thinking to become rigid and inflexible. And the other is called psychosclerosis. Psychosclerosis is simply a hardening of the attitudes. A hardening of the attitude. People with psychosclerosis develop what is called fixed ideas. Fixed ideas lead to rigidity and an unwillingness to change. Both of these lead to getting stuck in the comfort zone. Remember, the natural tendency of all human behavior is for you to start doing something in a certain way and then get stuck in a comfort zone. You get stuck in a comfort zone in a relationship, even if you're not happy, in a job, even if you're not satisfied, with a particular level of income, even if it's not enough. You have to fight the comfort zone, because the comfort zone very soon becomes a rut. And they say that a rut becomes a grave, and the only difference between a rut and the grave is the depth. Or another way that it's been put is that a grave is simply a rut, or the rut is simply a grave with the ends kicked out. So be very alert to that, because the great majority of people in our society tend and evolve naturally to get into a comfort zone, to become very rigid defenders of the status quo, to become very hardened in their attitudes. They get into this comfort zone, they fall into this rut, and even if it would be good for them, they don't change. Now, this leads us to the two great powers that control everything that happens to you. And the first power is the power of love. The power of love is the power that shapes your personality and shapes your destiny. The power of love simply says that everything that we do is either to get love or to compensate for the lack of love. We said earlier that children's entire personality is formed by the quality and quantity of love that they get, and that all adult problems are as the result of love withheld. Love withheld from our parents, and perhaps love withheld from people when we grow up. The other power is the power of suggestion. Now, the power of suggestion works on us all of our lives. The power of suggestion is extremely strong. What it does is it begins working on us almost from the time that we're born, sometimes from before birth, and the power of suggestion shapes us. It means that every single thought you think, everything you hear, everything that you see, touch, taste, or smell, everything that affects you in any way has an effect on your personality. We say it this way. We say everything counts. Everything counts, and especially when you become an adult, remember that everything counts. Now, the average adult in America watches 20 to 25 hours of television every week. The average senior citizen watches about 7 hours of television. Average child watches 3 or 4 hours of television per day. You know that the average chief executive officer of major American corporations watches less than 5 hours per week? Now, let me ask you a very simple question. Do you think there's a correlation between the number of hours that a person watches television and how successful they are in life? Do you think that the suggestive influences, books, magazines, tapes, courses, seminars, people, television programs, and so on, that you watch, listen to, read, associate with on an ongoing basis, do you think these suggestive influences are having any effect on your future? Let me just put it this way. Everything does count. And you have to ask yourself this question. I learned this many years ago. It's ask yourself this question. What is it that you want in life? Once you've asked yourself what it is you want in life, then you can look at around your world and you can determine what is right for you and what is wrong for you. What does that mean? It means that everything that moves you toward what you want is right, and everything that moves you away from what you want is wrong, but everything counts. Well, I have a good friend who goes on a diet on a regular basis, and every so often I catch him eating cheesecake. And sometimes he's eating 2 pieces of cheesecake with lunch. And I say to him, I said, I thought you were on a diet. I said, I thought you only eat fresh fruits and vegetables and natural foods. And he said, sure. He said, well, I said, what about the cheesecake? He said, well, I don't count that. Do you know how many people sit at home and watch television 3 or 4 hours a night, who want to be successful, who read the comic strips and the sports pages, who read junky magazines or nothing at all, listen to the radio, don't do anything with their time or their minds? They say, but I want to be successful. I want to be more successful. I said, well, what about all these things that you're doing to waste your time? They said, well, I don't count that. Unfortunately, nature counts everything. So this brings us to some laws that I want to share with you. The first law is the law of habit. Now, these are also mental laws. The law of habit is very similar to the law of inertia. The law of inertia says that a body at rest tends to remain at rest unless acted upon by an outside force. It also says that a body in motion tends to remain in motion unless acted upon by an outside force. The law of habit says that in the absence of a specific decision on your part to change some aspect of your life, the natural tendency will be to go on the same way indefinitely. As a time management specialist once said, the more you do of what you're doing, the more you get of what you've got. So you have to look at what you've got and look at what you're doing and say, is this what you want? You will go on indefinitely in the same direction unless you make a very concrete, specific decision to change. Also, there's another law. It's called the law of emotion. And by the way, before I get into the law of emotion, let me say this, that about 95% of everything that we do is by habit. That the only major difference between successful people and failures is that successful people have success habits and failures have failure habits. You've heard, for example, you've heard the old saying, early to bed, early to rise? They say, makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. Well, why is that? Why is it that so many successful people get up early in the morning? It's because they get a jump on the day. It's also because it forces them to go to bed earlier at night so they don't waste the evenings when they're the tiredest and least productive. So you find that over and over again, successful men and women are early to bed and early to rise. They have a success habit. Why is it that people don't go to bed early or don't get up early? Because they're too lazy, they're too undisciplined, they don't have goals that they want badly enough, they do not have success habits. 95% of your success is going to be determined by the type of habits you develop. And if you have good habits, you're going to be successful in spite of anything else. The law of emotion says simply this. It says that every decision that you make is based on emotion. Is that we used to say over and over again that people are 90% emotional and 10% logical. Well, one of the great discoveries that I've made in the course of my research is the discovery that we are 100% emotional, that we're not even 99% emotional, every single decision we make is an emotional decision. If somebody says, well, it's the logical thing to do, what it simply means is they have more emotion invested in that, even though it sounds logical. The law of emotion says that every decision that we make is emotional, and it says this. It says that stronger emotion will dominate a weaker emotion. Stronger emotion dominates a weaker emotion. So whichever emotion is stronger will be the dominant emotion and will determine what you do. All action is determined by the emotion that is predominant at the time. And with whatever the stronger emotion, if it is fear, fear will determine what you do. If it is desire, desire will determine what you do. The two major emotions that wrestle within us all the time are fear versus desire. World championship goes on over and over again. Your fears that hold you back, your desires that propel you forward. Now, how do you turn this equation so that your desires win? Very simple. You use the law of concentration, and you think about what you want all the time. You dwell on what you want all the time. You keep your mind fixed on your desires. You become totally preoccupied with what you want, and as we said before, your fears have a tendency to dwindle. But whichever thing you think about, if you think about your fears or you think about your desires, whichever one you think about, by the law of emotion is going to determine your actions, and your actions will determine your outcomes. This brings us to another law, which is called the law of expression. And this law of expression is very interesting. This law of expression goes back many, many years, and it predates even a quote from Aristotle, which says, whatever is impressed is expressed. Whatever is impressed is expressed. Whatever is impressed is expressed. Now, what does this mean? Let me go and sit down while we get the board cleaned off. It means simply this, is that whatever is impressed into your psyche for any reason, and from whatever source, whatever is mixed with emotion and dropped into your self-concept will eventually be expressed as part of your personality, part of your reality. It says, in effect, that you see the world through your self-concept. You actually see your concept of the world. You do not believe what you see what you believe. Whatever has been impressed on your mind as a fact, or as a truth, or as a reality, will then be expressed in your reality, or expressed in your world, because that is what you will see. If you believe that a certain type of people are good, then you will see goodness in those people. If you believe that members of a particular political party are fools, then all members of that political party will appear foolish to you, even the wisest and most intelligent. If you believe that there is opportunity everywhere, you will see opportunity everywhere. If you believe that you're in complete control of your own destiny, then you will see indications of that. If you believe that you are a popular, courageous, confident, influential person, then you will act in a manner consistent with it, and you will see it all around you. I was reading a very interesting story not long ago about a young man who came from poor beginnings and had no self-confidence at all, but was convinced by a fortune teller that he was the reincarnation of Napoleon Bonaparte. Wonderful story, true story too. And he began to believe that he was the reincarnation of Napoleon Bonaparte. And he went to the library and he studied Napoleon. He read all about Napoleon, and he began to walk and talk and act like Napoleon. He began to think like Napoleon. He began to imagine great plans like Napoleon would have imagined. He began to act with courage and confidence in the face of uncertainty, as Napoleon would have. Over time, he became absolutely convinced that indeed this person who was shy and retiring was truly the reincarnation of Napoleon. And as he did, his career improved. He was promoted. He was advanced. He changed the way he dressed. He spoke more confidently. And by the time he found out that he had been misled by the fortune teller, he was already an extremely successful businessman. Very interesting. Whatever is impressed and accepted becomes expressed. And this brings us to another critical mental law. And it is this. It is what is called the law of reversibility. When I first learned about this law, I was so excited I wanted to wrap it up and tie it up and not tell anybody. This is the first time in any form that I've ever explained this law to other people. The law of reversibility says simply this, is that if you achieve a certain level of success, a certain level of health, a certain quality of relationships, then that quality of relationships will create a subjective state. A subjective state means a feeling or an emotional state. In other words, if you win a prize, you will feel like a winner. If you fall in love, you'll feel like a lover. If you succeed in business, you'll feel like a success. The objective creates, in other words, the objective reality or the fact actually creates the subjective or the emotional state. That makes sense to you? In other words, something happens, you feel great, you get the feeling. However, the law of reversibility says this. If you can grasp this one fact alone can change your life because it has changed mine, is that if you can create artificially the subjective state, the feeling will trigger the law of attraction and correspondence into motion and will draw into your life the people, circumstances, and opportunities necessary to create the objective that is constant with the subjective. And here is the method. It's so simple, it's astonishing. It is this, is whenever you think of something that you really desire, imagine that you have it already. Imagine that you have it already. It sounds like a game, like children would play, but it is so powerful that it is awe-inspiring, and all I suggest you do is try it for a little while. Just imagine, close your eyes, drive it along, think about it if necessary, stand, relax, do whatever you want, but just imagine that you've already accomplished it and try to get the feeling. Get the feeling. As though it were already a success, as though it were a past tense, as though it were already accomplished, that you don't have to worry about it again. You've already got the feeling. And if you will play that feeling over and over again, this law of reversibility will create this feeling. As you dwell upon the feeling more and more, the feeling will actually begin to change things inside you and outside of you, draw you toward your goal and draw your goal toward you, and the objective will come into reality exactly at the right time and place. You don't even really have to worry about the process between the two or what the steps are. All you have to do is hold that feeling very, very intensely. And we'll talk about this a little bit more when we talk about mental programming methods. Now, the next law is the law of practice. The law of practice is also called the law of repetition, but it says that whatever you do over and over again, often enough, becomes a new habit. Do you want to be a positive, exciting, enthusiastic person? Do you want to become wealthy and successful? What is it that you want in life? Whatever you want in life, if you will practice it over and over again, it eventually becomes a new habit. If you practice it by thinking about it, you see, a new habit takes about 21 days to develop. It takes about 21 days to develop a new habit. 21 days of repeating it over and over again. Now, what we're going to ask you to do as a result of this course and as a result of what we've talked about is we're going to ask you or suggest that you go on what we call a 21-day PMA diet. That means that for 21 days, we're going to ask you to do a very difficult thing. One of the most difficult things you'll ever do in your life is for 21 days, we want you to keep your mind on what you want and keep it off of what you don't want. Keep your conversation on what you want. Keep your conversation off of what you don't want. Keep your dreams, your imagination, your thoughts, your feelings, everything in your environment consistent with what you desire, and keep it off of what you don't want. Very simple, not very complicated. It's one of the most difficult things that you'll ever do. Now, why do we pick 21 days? Well, a very good reason. You see, it takes 21 days for a chicken that has a brain the size of a pea to sit patiently, calmly, faithfully on an egg to hatch the egg. Now, we feel that if a chicken with a little brain like that can sit on an egg for 21 days without seeing any change, just in faith, for 21 days it can sit there on that egg, then we could probably ask adults who have brains that are the size of 3 pounds, that have 12 to 20 billion cells, and have the capacity to remember and retain all the knowledge known to man, if their brain could be tapped, we ask them to keep at it for 21 days. If you will go on a positive mental attitude diet for 21 days, keep your mind on it, the goal is to become what we call a purely positive person. A purely positive person. Because we know that if you're a purely positive person, if your conversations, your acts and your relationships are purely positive, what we call a PPP person, and you practice that for 21 days, you will find that your life will change, that everything around you will change, your health, your relationships, your work, your opportunities, and everything else. It's simple, but it's not easy. If you can do it, if you can practice it, it will become a new habit. The very law of reversibility, the very law of emotion, the very law of habit that we talked about will actually begin to be changed. Now, what are the 4 things you need in order to make this great change? Number 1 is you need desire. Desire is the starting point of all change. The most important question that you have to ask yourself in life is, how badly do you want what you want? How badly do you want it? Or do you want it at all? You see, there's an awful lot of people who want an awful lot of things. But how badly do they want it? If you want it so badly, if you want it with tremendous intensity of desire, there's really nothing in the world that can stop you from getting it. There's an interesting story was told about Socrates, and Socrates was talking to one of his students, and the student said, "I am hungry for knowledge. What can I do to increase my knowledge?" And Socrates said, knowledge is something that is readily available and easy to get if you want it bad enough. He said, I'm sure I want it badly enough. And Socrates said, come with me. And he walked him offshore into the ocean, and walked him offshore into the Aegean Sea. And they got about 3 or 4 feet. And Socrates, a very, very strong man, grabbed the young man and put his head under the water. And the young man began to struggle and struggle and struggle, and finally became incredibly frantic, and finally brought him up. And he said, now, what did you want while you were under the water? And he said, all I wanted was air. He said, all I could think of in the whole world was air. He said, when you want knowledge with the same intensity that you wanted that oxygen, you will get all the knowledge that you could desire. And when you want anything with great intensity, if you have the desire, you'll get it. Now, the second step is decision. Over and over again, where I travel, I find that the major change in a person's life begins when they make a decision. I also find that the great majority of people are incredibly indecisive, is that they're very reluctant to make decisions to cut off their options. They are very, very reluctant to make a commitment of any kind. And in not making a commitment, they just drift. They unfortunately condemn themselves to living by the law of accident. So the next step is to make a decision, a very clear, unequivocal decision, is that this is what you want and you are willing to pay the price to get it. There's a very interesting little book called The Ultimate Secret by Michael Hernacki, and he said that the key to success, after he studied many, many successful people, so the key to success is simply this, is be willing to do whatever is necessary. Be willing to do whatever is necessary. Be willing to do whatever is necessary. That means once you've made the decision, be willing to go the extra mile. Be willing to do whatever is necessary. And the interesting thing is that you won't ever have to do everything that's necessary, but you must be willing to do it. And it's that unequivocal decision, that do or die, that complete, total, 100% commitment that makes all the difference in your success. Most people are unwilling to make the commitment. And if they do make the commitment, they hold themselves back. They say, I want it, but I'm not willing to do this, or I won't do that, or I won't move, I won't go back to school, I can't sacrifice this, and so on. I've spoken to many parents, for instance, who have undergone great sacrifices so that the mother can stay home with the young children during their first 3 to 5 years. And people say, well, you're crazy, you need the money, you can't take trips, you don't have enough money to pay bills when you're not 1 or 2 people working. They say yes, but our decision is to give our children the finest grounding and the finest emotional basis possible. And we feel that the way to do it is for the mother to be home with the children. So they are willing to make the sacrifices. And of course, everybody has to make their decisions with regard to what sacrifices they want to make. The third is determination. Determination means to back your plan with, if you like, iron willpower. Again, every single study that I've looked at, and I spent, in the course of my lifetime, I spent almost 30,000 hours studying the subject of personal and corporate success, is that iron willpower is absolutely critical. Determination, the willingness to stick in when the going gets tough, the willingness to persist in the face of adversity, that kind of determination is absolutely critical to developing the new habit patterns of thought that will guarantee your success. And finally, disciplines. This is my big favorite. It's usually the only place in this course where I mention this, but discipline is the master key to riches. Discipline is the master key to riches. Discipline, the willingness to do what you know you should do, when you should do it, whether you like it or not, is the critical key to your success. Why is it that people fail in life? It's no miracle. It's no mystery. The reason people fail in life is that they're not willing to do whatever is necessary. They're not willing to pay the price. Half the time, most 3/4 of the time, they don't know what they want. And the ones that do know what they want are not capable of disciplining themselves. So the next time you sit there watching the television, next time you drive along listening to the radio instead of listening to an audio cassette program, you have to ask yourself quite honestly, in terms of the wonderful life that you are capable of enjoying, in terms of all the things that you want, is this moving you toward it, or is it moving you away from it? Because the truth of the matter is that everything that does not move you towards your goal moves you away from your goal. That nothing is neutral, that everything counts, that the sands of time are running, the clock, the meter is going right now. A very good friend of mine said, remember, this life is not a rehearsal for anything else. This is the real one. And the question you have to ask yourself is, are you serious about being and having and doing everything that's possible for you? If you're going a 21-day mental attitude diet, a PMA diet, if you will keep your thoughts on what you want for 21 days, if you will practice the law and develop new habits, practice repetition over and over again, practice the law of reversibility and visualize and imagine yourself as the person you want to be, and practice the law of expression, that whatever is impressed on your mind will be expressed in your reality, you will see dramatic changes start to take place in your life, and sometimes far faster than you can currently imagine. Believe me, I know I have tried and practiced everything that I recommend to you. Thousands of my graduates have done it, and the results they have accomplished have been stupendous. They will be stupendous for you, too, and we'll talk about more of that in the next module.
Session 10, Changing Your Self-Concept.
To repeat, all change in your life begins with a change in your self-concept. And that brings us back to what we talked about when we talked about the 3 ingredients of self-concept at the very beginning. We said that there were 3 parts: the self-ideal, the self-image, and the self-esteem, or how much you like yourself. And what I'd like to do now is I'd like to talk a little bit about what we call the self-ideal, because the self-ideal is the person that you would most like to be. When you start thinking about changing your personality, improving the quality of your life, your inner and your outer life, you have to start off with a target. You have to start off with something to shoot for, something to aim at. So let's talk about this. The self-ideal is a fundamental part of your personality. The self-ideal is a combination of all of the qualities of men and women that you have read about, studied about, associated with, or admired throughout your entire life. Your self-ideal is sort of like a role model for you, an internal role model. And this internal role model acts as a directional mechanism within your psyche that determines your words, actions, thoughts, behaviors, and so on. As a matter of fact, you are today, in many respects, the sum total composite of all the different men and women whose qualities and characteristics that you ever admired. If you read a biography, an autobiography, a story about a person who has done something that you think is admirable, displayed qualities of intelligence or character or compassion or perseverance or persistence or courage and so on, if someone has done those things and you have a tendency to admire them, if you admire them, what happens is you have a tendency unconsciously, even without your knowing it, to try to be more like them. Now, there is a difference between the self-image, which is where you see yourself now, and your self-esteem, which is how much you like yourself. And there's a difference between your self-image and your self-ideal. The different distance between these two, the way you see yourself now and the way you would ideally like to be, has a major impact on your self-esteem. People who see themselves working progressively toward becoming more and more like the people they want to be have high self-esteem. People who see themselves as having an enormous, almost unbridgeable distance between the person they see themselves as now and the person they know they should or could be usually have low self-esteem. So the starting point of change in the self-concept, to repeat, comes with defining clearly what it is you want to look like. Now, when I was about 17, 18 years old, I sat down with a notebook and I wrote out a description of the person that I wanted to be when I grew up. I wrote several pages. I described my personality and my height and my weight and how I would get along with people and so on. And many years later, 10, 15, 20 years later, after I had traveled around the world twice, after I'd been in 80 countries, after I had done a great variety of things, I came across those notes in an old suitcase. And I looked and I read them. And you know, the surprising thing was that I had become, over the course of that time, the person that I had described in that notebook. So I suggest to you this, is you start off by saying, who is it and what is it that you would like to look like 1 year, 3 years, 5 years from now? Or let's put it this way, and here's a really good question. Name 3 men or women, living or dead, that you really admire, that you really feel are wonderful, fine, upstanding role models. And then ask yourself the question, why is it that you admire them? Why is it that you like them? What is it about them? What are their qualities, if you like, that you consider outstanding? Because those are the qualities, if you can identify them, that you'll begin moving toward accomplishing in your own life. Remember, we said that desire, discipline, determination, and decision are the keys to success, but also definition. You have to define clearly what you want to be. I remember a wonderful story of a young fellow who decided he wanted to improve his life, and he was working for an insurance company. And he sat and looked around him, and he was number 28 or 29 out of 30 people in an insurance company selling insurance, and he'd been there for several years, and his career was going nowhere. And he began looking about him, looking at this, and he said, now, who do I admire? Who would I like to be like? Who would my ideal be? And he decided he wanted to be like the top salesman in the branch. And he started to look at the top salesmen and the top 1 or 2 salespeople in the branch, and he started to think about them and think about what they did. And he began to talk to them and get advice from them. And over the course of the next few years, by using this process, by patterning himself after the people he admired, he became more and more like them. He dressed like them. He walked like them. He talked like them. He worked the way they did. He studied the way they did. And in time, he became not only the top salesman in the branch, the top salesman in the region, the top salesman in the division, eventually the top salesman in the country, and he became a marketing vice president for one of the biggest insurance companies in the nation, simply by establishing a self-ideal and then working progressively toward it. Well, what are the stages? The first starting stage, as we say, of changing the self-concept, of changing your mind, becoming a new or a different person, is that the change must be perceived by you as being both desirable and necessary. In other words, you must see that if you were to make this change, it would be a worthwhile change. And in terms of what you want to be, have, and do, in terms of the future of your life, it's necessary that you make this change if you want to get ahead. I'll give you another example of a famous gentleman from a Fortune 500 corporation, was promoted to president, came up through engineering, left brain, had no people skills at all, was very, very concerned about this part of his personality in that he didn't know how to get along with people. He preferred problems that didn't talk back. But he recognized that a change in his self-concept, a change in his ability to communicate effectively with others was essential to his success. So he began taking courses on interpersonal communications. He began taking courses on relationships. For 2 solid years, he read books, listened to tapes, took courses, and became an authority within the company on human relations, and then put together a course of his own and went throughout the company as the president of the company and taught this course within his company, becoming the things that he was teaching. In other words, he decided that to be very good with people was both desirable and necessary for himself, his company, and his future. And then he went about through the process of gradual defining the ideal and began working progressively toward it. In 2 years, he had rounded out his personality from being a lopsided, left-brain, linear, analytical person to being a totally rounded, fully functioning human being. One of the hallmarks of great leaders, one of the hallmarks of outstanding men and women, is that they're willing to make the efforts necessary to bring about the changes that are essential. Now, the second stage, or the second step in changing your self-concept, is to begin thinking about yourself as you would ideally be. Begin thinking about yourself as your ideal person. For instance, if you wanted to be an outstanding person in human relations, you'd begin thinking about yourself as you would be as a human relations specialist. But let us say you want something very simple. Most people say that their major weakness is that they are too impatient, too intolerant, they get angry too quickly, irritable, so on. Maybe what you should do is start with something very simple. Very important to start with something simple, because if you can change something simple, it proves to you that you can change something large. So you begin thinking about yourself. Let us say that you tend to be a little bit impatient or short-tempered when you're tired, or you're a little bit irritable with your children or your spouse at the end of the day. So then you begin thinking about yourself as you would be if you were a warm, patient, kind, loving, tolerant human being. Begin thinking about yourself in the situations where you normally become cross and irritable, and begin thinking about yourself as being relaxed, positive, supportive, encouraging, unruffled. Begin thinking about yourself as the ideal. Think now, who do you know who has the type of personality? Now, it can be a television personality. It can be Bill Cosby, if you like. It can be somebody that you admire in sports. It can be somebody whose biographies or stories you've read. It doesn't really matter, but keep thinking about how would that person act in this situation. One thing that many people do, many Christians do, is whenever they get into a difficult or stressful situation, they say to themselves, I wonder how Jesus would act in this situation. I wonder how Jesus would act if they were dealing with a difficult person. Or I wonder how Jesus would act if he were put in the same position I'm in. And what it does is, irrespective of your belief, what it does is it gives you a role model to pattern yourself after. The great tragedy of many young people growing up in the inner cities today is that the role models that they have are not positive role models. The people who are the most successful sometimes in the ghettos in the inner cities are not admirable people who are working hard and building families and businesses. What they are is they're criminals who are engaging in criminal activities. So the role models that you choose have a critical effect on who you become. So begin thinking about yourself as you would like to be. As you would like to be. Now that's starting point. Because of the law of expression, whatever is impressed is expressed. If you begin thinking about yourself, you begin finding it's almost like turning the wheel of your personality. You begin to become a different person. Now the third step is you begin to visualize. Now what does visualize mean? Well, there are thousands of books written on visualization. One of the most powerful of all human abilities is the ability to create clear mental pictures. You see, your subconscious, which is where all of your programming takes place, is activated by mental pictures combined with emotion. So when you create clear mental pictures, when you begin to dwell on a clear mental picture of the person that you would like to be, you begin to close your eyes or think about the person that you would like to be, the subconscious cannot tell the difference between a real experience, one that is actually happening to you, and one that you vividly imagine on the screen of your mind. And this method of visualization, of creating a clear mental picture, and then remember we talked about the law of practice, which is the law of repetition. By practicing it over and over and over again. Imagine, for instance, that you wanted to become a proficient public speaker. Simple as that. And let us say this is you, and this is your eyes, and here is your conscious mind, and here is your unconscious mind. Let us say you wanted to become a proficient public speaker. Well, if you went out and you gave a whole series of talks, and you got positive response, and people applauded and told you that it was a good talk, and you did this over and over again, no matter how terrified you are of public speaking right now, if you did it often enough, gradually you would store up enough memories to the point where you would feel no uneasiness at all about speaking publicly. Now, the reason I mention speaking publicly is that something like 54% of the American public would rather die than give a talk in public. They put the fear of public speaking ahead of the fear of death. It's one of the greatest of all fears in our society. However, no child is born as afraid of public speaking. No child comes into the world with a fear of speaking in front of audiences. As a matter of fact, every one of us gave our first public talk stark naked, upside down, in front of a room full of strangers, if you remember that, and it's been downhill for most of us ever since. If you have a series of external experiences, however, and all of those experiences are positive, then they're stored away as positive reports in the public speaking file. However, let us say that you have a tremendous feeling of anxiety about speaking, and that can come from 100 different reasons, but you begin to play on the screen of your mind. You have this continuous reel projector. You begin to play on the screen of your mind a picture of yourself speaking effectively in front of a group. You begin to read about other people who speak effectively. You begin to read the books of successful speakers who tell how they did it and how nervous they were. You begin to take a course and you begin to study and you begin to learn how to do it. You begin to learn how to prepare and to outline a talk. And you begin thinking about yourself over and over again as capable of doing it. The picture that you play on the screen of your mind is accepted by the subconscious as a real experience as long as you vividly imagine it. And this is the key. It is the vividness of the picture. The more clearly you visualize it, the more frequently you visualize it, the more emotionally or intensely you visualize it, and the longer you visualize it, the more of an impact it has on the subconscious mind, so that you can, in many respects, actually become halfway or 3/4 of the way toward being a competent speaker or being confident in almost anything simply by visualizing and playing this picture over and over again. By the way, I use the example of speaking in public for a very specific reason. Most of us are afraid of it. And what I have found is that if you can use these methods of mental programming to eliminate one major fear that may be holding you back in life, you will prove to yourself forever that you can eliminate any self-limiting belief and overcome it and go on to accomplish what you want. I have given this advice to thousands of people. It's simply this: if you have an uneasiness with regard to public speaking or any other fear, but public speaking for this example, make the decision right now to get over it. Now here's 2 ways that you can get over it. Toastmasters. Does this method work? Well, I'll guarantee you that it works. Toastmasters was set up in 1923 as an organization, a voluntary organization. Groups of men and women come together, small groups. They meet once a week, and they have breakfast, lunch, and or dinner meetings. And at each meeting, each person has a chance to talk. People who are so terrified of public speaking they could not lead silent prayer in a phone booth, after 10 or 15 weeks in Toastmasters are capable of standing up with 1 minute's notice and giving an extemporaneous talk in front of an audience of strangers. Toastmasters works. Why? It's because every single time a person stands up, they get positive feedback, they get correction, they get advice, they get applause, they get support. Eventually, what you do is you build up a whole series of positive reports in your subconscious mind that says, when it comes to public speaking, it's easy. If you want to be effective at selling, if you want to be effective at leading, if you want to be effective as a parent, if you want to be effective with other human beings, all you have to do is practice over and over again, and practice in your mind over and over until eventually you will find that when you think about whatever it is, the fear level will go down, confidence level will go up. By the way, one other area that you can go to if you want to learn to be more capable speaking is Dale Carnegie. Dale Carnegie has a wonderful course, which is just called the Dale Carnegie course, which really helps people become proficient in public speaking. Over 10 to 14 weeks, you get an opportunity every single week to get up and speak in front of your peers. The next is affirmations. Now, with affirmations, your potential is unlimited. Affirmations are the most powerful words that you can possibly say. Affirmations are based on what we call the 3 Ps. In that with affirmations, we reprogram ourselves unconsciously. Affirmations are strong, positive, assertive statements that you say about yourself, to yourself, and believe. And they're based on the 3 Ps. And the Ps are, first of all, personal. All affirmations, all statements that you say to yourself have to be couched in the personal tense, the I. If you say, I like myself, I like myself, I like myself. When you say, I like myself, it accesses the subconscious directly. Every single command that begins with an I opens the subconscious mind and says, valuable information coming down. Prepare or get ready. And also positive. All affirmative statements must be couched in the positive tense, because the subconscious mind filters out negatives and only takes the words that the positive expression. For example, if you wanted to quit smoking, you wouldn't say, I don't smoke anymore. I don't smoke anymore. You would say, I am a non-smoker. I am a non-smoker. The words I am are 2 of the most powerful words in mental programming. When you say I am, because only you can say I am about you. In the whole world, nobody else can use those 2 words with regard to you. And your subconscious recognizes it. When you say I am responsible, I am responsible, you can actually feel the impact of these words on your unconscious mind. You can feel the words I am responsible and feel their effect on your emotions. Now, the third is that they must be in the present tense. Not I will lose weight, or I will quit smoking, or I will get a better job, but I have a better job. I weigh X number of pounds. I earn X number of dollars. I earn X number of dollars. Whatever it happens to be, you always place it in the present tense because the subconscious mind can only take language that is couched in the now. It's very, very important that when we are reprogramming the subconscious mind, when you visualize, it's in the now. When you affirm, it's in the now. When you think about yourself as you would like to be, it is always in the now. The subconscious mind is, by the way, it's very literal. So when you create affirmations, and you can recreate affirmations for every goal that you could imagine. I earn X number of dollars. I weigh X number of pounds. I am a kind, loving human being. I am disciplined and industrious and fastidious. I am a good driver. I am punctual. I like myself. I am responsible. I feel great. I feel happy. I have health. I have energy. Interesting affirmation. If you repeat the affirmation over and over again, I have health, I have energy, I have health, I have energy, you can actually build up your body's resistance to things like colds and flus. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but very often we get sick because we decide to get sick, or we get sick because we let our minds and bodies coast, and we can actually drive a cold out of our systems by repeating the affirmation over and over again. I have health, I am healthy, I am strong, I feel great, I feel wonderful. So couch your affirmations in your visualization. When you close your eyes, see yourself as though you had the characteristic or quality right now. Speak in terms of having the characteristic or quality right now. And as we said before with regard to emotion, imagine the feeling that would accompany the mental picture. Imagine the feeling that would accompany the words. When you say, I like myself, you don't say, I like myself. You say, I like myself. I like myself. I like myself. Imagine when you say, I am responsible, you don't say, I am responsible. You say, I am responsible. I am responsible. In other words, emotionalize it. Wrap it up with emotion. Drive it into the subconscious mind like a detonator. And the effect that it will have on your personality and on your feelings will be tremendous. Now, again, with regard to affirmations, what I use is a series of index cards, and you can put your affirmations, your positive present tense personal statements on affirmations, and review those affirmations over and over again. Every time you review them, every time you think about them, every time you repeat them and drive them into the subconscious mind, every time you impress them, you increase the potential for them to be expressed externally. Now, one final thing is when you use affirmations, try to keep your daily words and actions consistent with your affirmations. Try to keep the things that you say when you're walking around and the things that you do consistent with the words that you say to yourself in private. All right, the next thing that we do is what is called verbalization. Verbalization is speaking aloud, speaking your affirmations aloud. Now, there's two ways that you can do this. Best to do it in private, but basically you increase the impact of an affirmation by as much as 80% and even more when you say it out loud. If you say to yourself, I like myself, but if you say, I like myself, or I feel terrific, or I feel wonderful, or I am responsible, I earn $50,000 a year. When I first learned about this process, my goal was to earn $50,000 a year, and I realized that the only way I could ever earn $50,000 a year was by repeating this over and over again. And surprisingly enough, when I began doing it, I was not making anywhere near $50,000, and I was very, very skeptical of whether or not it would work. I can only tell you from the bottom of my heart that it does work. So verbalize it. Another thing that you can do is in front of a mirror. If you verbalize in front of a mirror, you have two impacts working simultaneously. You have the impact of what you can see, plus what you are saying, plus if you emotionalize what you are saying, you have three access points to reprogramming the subconscious working simultaneously. So you stand in front of a mirror, you can say in front of the mirror, you say, I feel terrific, or I look great, or I look great, or you can say, you look great. Because when we talk to ourselves in front of a mirror, now you mustn't do this in a public washroom when there's other people around, because they may think you're a little bit strange, but nonetheless, verbalization is a very important part of driving this message into the subconscious. Remember, the key to this is whatever you can hold in your mind on a continuing basis, you can have. The only question is, can you repeat it long enough and hard enough, often enough, to impress it permanently in the subconscious mind? Once you impress it permanently in the subconscious mind, it takes on a power of its own that will eventually bring it into your reality at exactly the right time and in exactly the right way for you. And this brings us to the next method, which is the method of assume the role. Assume the role. Assume the part. You see, one of the most important discoveries that we have made in behavioral psychology is this, is that if you feel a particular way, if you have a particular emotion, the feelings will lead to actions. We've talked about this before, that we act in a way consistent with our feeling. However, what we've found is that most of us do not start off feeling motivated. Most of us do not start off feeling positive. Most of us do not start off feeling confident and capable of accomplishing our goals. Most of us start off feeling average to negative. However, if you will act exactly as if you had the feeling, the action will generate the emotion just as the emotion generates the feeling. In other words, you can act your way into feeling. This is very important. You can act your way into feeling. Have you ever had the occasion where you are sitting comfortably, relaxed, and somebody says, come on, let's go and do this, or let's get up and do that? And you say, no, I'm comfortable. Remember, you're into your comfort zone. Comfort is a great killer of human potential. You say, no. They say, oh, come on, just get up and do a little bit. So you get up just a little bit and you move just a little bit. And as you begin to move, you start to get into the swing of it. And pretty soon you get into it completely and you totally forget about going back to the couch or the chair that you were in. Well, you can act your way into feeling. You can act your way into feeling almost anything. We call this, if you like, pretending. Pretend that you have the quality already. For instance, if you want to be courageous and unafraid, pretend that you're courageous and unafraid already. If you want to be confident, pretend that you have the confidence. There's an old saying that says, fake it until you make it. Fake it until you make it. Remember we talked about the gentleman who was told that he was the reincarnation of Napoleon, that all he had to do was he had to act like Napoleon and realize that he had this cultural history behind him, that he had the decisiveness, the power, the courage, the genius, the brilliance, the tenacity, the foresight of one of the world's great leaders. Well, this acting, this pretending, this assuming the role is a critical part of actually becoming that person. If you want to be the finest salesperson in your organization, if you want to be a superb executive, if you want to be a tremendous technician, if you want to be an excellent medical professional, if you want to be the best mother or the best father, if you want to be excellent in athletics, there's an entire body of work today in neurolinguistic programming and what is called the inner game of winning that says that if you want to be a better tennis player, for instance, what you do is you imagine that you were a championship tennis player. Imagine that you are Arthur Ashe or Jimmy Connors or Chris Everett Lloyd or Maria Navatra, whatever her name is, Navatra, or one of the great tennis players, and play tennis exactly as if you were one of those. Play tennis as though you were them and in their body and on the court. And you know what will happen is that judges and people observing a person doing this find that you will hit more accurately, you hit with more force, you are better, you are more confident, you're more capable. Golfers. Another example is if you want to be a great golfer, is imagine that you are already a great golfer. If you want to be a great salesperson, imagine that you are already a great salesperson and walk, talk, carry, act as though you had the part already. Dress the part. Look at yourself in the mirror and say, do I look the part of a great golfer? Do I look the part of the executive, the salesman, or the saleswoman, or whatever it happens to be that I would like to be? These four, we call this the VAVA. V-A-V-A. V-A-V-A. I should do it this way. V-A-V-A. These are the keys to rapid personality change. The V is for visualization. Visualize and play the picture of the desired person you would like to be over and over again until it is accepted by the subconscious as a reality. Remember, the subconscious obeys your conscious commands. If you command the subconscious, and you command the subconscious by the thoughts you hold in your conscious mind, by the thoughts that you dwell upon, the law of concentration. If you hold that thought in your mind on a continuing basis, eventually it clicks into the subconscious and it takes on a power of its own. The second is to affirm, and affirm over and over again. There are many people who say that they would rather go without breakfast than go without their affirmations each morning. Speak to yourself positively. Use positive self-talk all the time. Remember, you talk to yourself at the rate of almost 1,500 words a minute. Most people talk to themselves in terms of doubt and fear and worry and anxiety. Talk to yourself positive. I can do it. I can do it. I can do it. I can do it. Just repeating, I can do it. I can do it over and over again. Boost your self-confidence and boost your self-esteem. When you have nothing else to do, say, I like myself. I like myself. I like myself. I like myself. Because saying I like myself or I love myself expands your ability and your capacity in every area of your life. Also, verbalize. Speak out loud. Make sure the things that you say out loud are consistent with the person that you want to be and the things that you want to do. Verbalize and say, I like myself. Don't say aloud things that like, I'm never on time, I can't lose weight, I can't quit smoking, I wish I could, and so on. But always speak in positive terms. Remember that you can almost double the force of an affirmation by speaking it aloud. And if you speak it really loud, I like myself, I like myself, I like myself, you speak it really loud and really strong, it has double, triple, sometimes several times the impact. And finally, assume the role. Pretend as though you already had the part. Assume the role. Imagine that you have been hired to play the role of an extremely successful person in a Broadway play. And in this role, what you are going to do is you're going to walk, talk, and act as though you were the success, as though you were the role model, as though you were the ideal image of the perfect person that you want to become. And if you walk it, talk it, pretend it, visualize it, think it, and affirm it over and over again, that is the person that you become as inevitably as the sun rising in the east and setting in the west. And in the next session, I'll tell you more about how to incorporate these personality attributes into your character.
Session 11, The New Mental Diet.
Back in the 1930s, a man named Gaylord Hauser shocked the medical world by coming out with a series of claims and statements that said that everything that we ate in some way affected our body. He said that everything that you eat is translated into something and has a positive or negative effect. And he wrote a book called The New Diet Does It. Now, in this session and in the previous sessions, we've been talking about the new mental diet. And just as everything that you eat has an effect on your physical body, everything that you take into your mind has an effect on your mental body, on what's going on inside you, which determines what happens around you. When we were talking a little bit earlier, we said that the power of suggestion is one of the most important powers in your life. The power of suggestion says that everything that you take in, everything that you think about, everything that you read, everything that you listen to, all of your conversations, radio, television, newspaper, books, papers, magazines, everything that you allow to influence your thinking affects your subconscious mind, affects your attitudes, your expectations, your values, your beliefs, and ultimately your potential as a human being. In fact, the great difference between human beings is not intelligence and not education and not opportunity. It is what they are feeding into their minds on a regular basis. Now, we also said, and it's the same thing, if you were to say, well, yes, I eat good food a lot of the time, but some of the time, or 50% of the time, I eat junk food. I eat food that's high in salt, high in sugar, low in nutrition, inert foods, dead foods, white flour, French fries, grease, and so on. But it doesn't bother me, it doesn't have any effect on my body. You would know that that is nonsense because everything counts. Everything counts. One of the marks of a truly honest person is that they accept reality. And reality is that everything that you do, mentally or physically, counts. And it's either positive, it's either helping you, moving you toward what you want to be and have and do, or it's negative, it's moving you away, but nothing is neutral. Everything counts. So with regard to the power of suggestion, let's go on and talk about how we complete this process of reprogramming ourselves so that inside we are totally successful human beings, so that outside we will be totally positive, enthusiastic, successful human beings. Feed your mind the same way you would feed your body. Feed your mind carefully. If you were concerned about physical health and longevity, you would measure and calculate and look into the foods you eat. Look carefully into the mental foods that you eat too, because these mental foods, by a process that we call the law of accumulation, Now, the law of accumulation is both a mental law as well as a physical law, and what it says is that every single thing that you do, positive or negative, accumulates. That every single great achievement in life is the result of thousands of ordinary achievements, struggles, fallbacks, failures, minor disappointments. Every single big accomplishment is preceded by thousands of tiny little accomplishments. Every overnight success is preceded by years and years and years of working off-Broadway. Every single great fortune, by the way, in studying self-made millionaires in America, do you know what we found is the average time that it takes to become a millionaire in America is over 20 years of hard work. In other words, we see a person who is wealthy, got a beautiful home, beautiful car, financially independent, but we don't realize that there are years and years and years of hard work, struggle, and sacrifice that preceded it. We see the person, we see the end result, and we say, isn't that person lucky? Well, the fact of the matter is that there's no luck. There's just this long process of accumulation, and everything counts. Every single honest effort that you make toward becoming a better person accumulates like a snowball and has an effect. Every single time you do something that takes you away, that wastes your time, wastes your mind, wastes your thought, and so on, that has an effect too, and that accumulates. Now, the great mistake that many people make is they go a little bit forward and a little bit backward.